So welcome back to another episode of The Creative Real Estate Agent. I'm so excited today because I have a really amazing guest today. Her name's Teza Lord, and she is an author and artist currently based in St. Augustine, Florida. And Teza has a really inspiring biography. I'm just going to touch on a few things. She attended the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in 1968. And, since then, she has done all kinds of stuff all over the world, many projects. Some of the notable ones that stood out to me that I'll mention were she created botanical illustrations for Harvard University. She traveled by boat, sailing many a mile. She's created props and special effects for the movie Jaws back in the 80s, as well as being involved in her husband Carter's films. And she's an artist, like I said, so she's created so much art. And she hosts the Teza Lord podcast since 2019. But in addition to all this, something that you may not know about Teza is that she's also been involved in real estate related projects, including landlording, if that's a word, to renovating and flipping and long-term investment. So we're going to be chatting about all of that today. And I'm just going to go ahead and say welcome to the show, Teza.
Well, thanks. Hi, Anastasia. Hi, everybody out there in podcast land.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
I'm really happy to be here. Very excited.
Nice. Well, so the first thing I'm going to bring up is something that obviously most people would not know. It's that we are actually neighbors. We're not next door neighbors, but we are like around the corner type neighbors. And that's how I met Teza, right in the 2020. Before the world turned upside down. And I've had the honor of being a guest at Teza's lovely home, which to me feels like a cross between an art museum and a temple. It's definitely has a mystical, very artful and heartful feeling to the home. So I thought to kind of break the ice and start the conversation, maybe you could tell people a little bit about what you've done with your home to make it so unique. I think especially to this area, I mean, your backyard, it feels like kind of like a jungle somehow. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about what you're doing with your property.
Okay. Well, I'm totally committed to xeriscape, and I'm a xeriscaper. And that basically means rip out the lawn, get rid of water-based plants, use as many indigenous species as you can. And in our area, we have a lot of water because we live close to the ocean. So we want water soaking plants. So I created a bamboo jungle, as you said. And it really does feel like Costa Rica here. I've spent a lot of time in Costa Rica. We actually have an investment in Costa Rica too. And my husband and I just love to travel, and we love to feel very much at home when we're home. So I created my favorite environment, which is jungle. I've been living in the tropical jungle since I left Boston back in the 60s. And I lived in the islands for so many years, the Caribbean islands, traveled all over, did businesses. And I just love the feeling of being in lush tropical environments. So I created it here, which is pretty unique for Northern Florida. A lot of people think you can't do that, but you can if you go xeriscape. So that's basically it. I wouldn't call it my backyard. It's every single direction around us is a xeriscape. And when you come up to our house, it looks like a very tiny little cottage. But when you walk into the grounds, all of a sudden it becomes very expansive and really tall timber bamboos. Some of them are 70, 80 feet tall. And it takes minimum maintenance. It's surprising how little maintenance for xeriscape. Basically, you put plants in with a lot of thought of designing. And instead of mowing a lawn every week, I just go around and stomp when a new growth comes up, when the growing season comes. So it's really less work to have xeriscape.
That's really interesting. It's a different kind of maintenance. I've actually seen, I've seen this stomping take place when I was there. I think Teza noticed a couple little sprouts coming up. She's like, nope, not today.
Stomp, stomp, right.
Yes. Well,
It's
yeah,
like
that's
training a
true.
dog, like when you have a dog, you have to teach it not to do its business inside. So with bamboo, you have to teach it. Bamboo, you get either a circular growing bamboo or you get the spreaders. And I always get the circular. They're called oh, I forget what they're called, clumpers, as opposed to spreaders. So you train them by stomping, and then they say, okay, we won't go anywhere except where you tell us to go.
Oh, how funny. Is clumper and spreader just the way to describe the behavior of the plants,
It's
or are they two different species?
two different kinds of families. There's many species in the spreaders, there's many species in the clumpers. So anybody who's going to be buying bamboo, make sure you do not get a spreader unless you have 100 acres, because you need 100 acres.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. That's a very
Yeah.
interesting. That's a really good. I'm glad you brought up the point about like, I wouldn't just describe it as my backyard. It's like all directions, because that's true. I mean, I know that aren't you expanding now and doing some more work
Right.
to your.
So when we bought our property in '07, we immediately tried to get the empty lot next door to us, adjacent to us, because it was basically an unbuildable lot. And we did an environmental impact study on it. We hired scientists to come and do the little drill of the soil, and we presented to the owners, this is an unbuildable lot, so sell it to us. And they did at a very reasonable price. So right away we started off with 2 properties, 2 lots. And then for years, we tried to get the one next door, which was an absolute wild piece of land that had never been touched. And the owners had a sentimental reason for not getting rid of it. And just at the beginning of the pandemic this year, last year would be 2000, they said, yes, we will sell it to you. So we've been working on having a little bit of sunlight, because all the rest of our property is shaded bamboo with these beautiful bamboo gardens. And the sunny part is my new art studio and gardens with sun.
Beautiful. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I love the story of just how you're developing it and just how it's growing. That's really neat.
Yeah.
It's really neat.
Right. My husband just finished building what I call the Roman aqueduct. And we're all do-it-yourself people, DIY people. We just love being involved with our creative pursuits in the property that we're living in, not just, investment property. So he had to come up with a solution, the 2 of us together, and we consulted with a landscape architect friend of ours and water moving people, and then built a way to get the water to move out of the land, because you have to think about these things when you deal with ocean property. We have a lot of water, we have to move it, and we have to get it into unfortunate, our neighborhood has these ditches that take everything to the major source of water.
That really is a big deal for anybody that's an owner, a homeowner in St. Augustine, or a landowner, or considering it's you do have to think about the way the land is directing the water. There has to be a way for the water to be drained.
Yes,
it's definitely something that's come up before in some deals. And honestly, we just put in a little cement pad we're going to be having a hot tub here. And definitely one of the things you have to think about is, am I going to be impacting the yard in a way that's going to prevent the flow of water from leaving the yard, so important. But I love the way that you guys have gone about that, and just, it's really cool. I hope you guys can kind of picture what she's describing. It's really special.
Yeah, it is. And anybody who's dealing with water issues, you got to think about that first before you put any plantings in. You can't create a garden and then think about where the water is going to go. So you really want to address that first. And the best way is to see what's happening when there's a big rainfall, and really study it, because you can't project, because the land is the land, and the land has its own personality, and it wants to go the way it wants to go.
Right. That's great advice. Well, I'd like to go back into the past a little bit. Yes, time travel.
I know, hot tub time machine.
Here we
Let's
go.
hot tub.
It all connects somehow. You mentioned to me the other day when we were chatting that after art school, so I kind of figure that might have been in the late 60s, maybe early 70s. You were a landlord for a while up over in
Mhm.
Boston, and I was just wondering, how did you get into that? What brought you into that particular role?
Well, it's funny, being a creative person, I never wanted a straight job. I tried to avoid that. So I always just lived off of my creative wits, and building a beautiful place out of not a beautiful place came into my life at a very early age. I wasn't even 20 when I did my first property, and I had partners, and we were a group of people who just really had great ideas for this property. Now, I was living in Boston. I went to the school, the Museum of Fine Arts, like I said. And in those days, this is more like the mid 60s, and in 67, 68, we were having a lot of civil unrest. And I really wanted to live with my beautiful friends of different colors. So I went to live in Roxbury, which was considered the ghetto of Boston, just because I have always been attracted to intermingling among people. I don't like being separate. I just like being with all different kinds of people. So at that time, you could purchase these old Victorian houses basically for a penny because of people not paying the taxes. So we purchased two apartment buildings right next to each other. They were like sisters, and they had 3 apartments each, the 3 floors, for less than 5,000 each. I mean, it's just amazing. The other day I checked, a friend sent me a link who lived with me, was one of my tenants. And she sent me the link. It was recently sold in Boston for like 1.5 million, the same property.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so they're beautiful old wooden structures that had to be completely stripped, replumbed, rewired. And we could all do that because we were all very handy and we were creative people. So I was interested in that. At the same time, I was also teaching silversmithing because I used to be a jeweler. And this was before I became a botanical illustrator. So I was doing a lot of jewelry and making jewelry for galleries. I had a little studio in the basement, but we would just take one apartment at a time and just do it and fill it up with tenants. And we had like a little enclave of really interesting creative people in Roxbury. So it was a lifestyle choice. It wasn't really a business choice. It was just something that came into my life, and I thought, wow, this really fits with my goals about being creative and not having to get dressed up in stockings and go to work, which in those days you had to wear stockings. In Boston, it was very interesting. When I went to school, we were not allowed to wear slacks. That's what a dinosaur
Oh,
am.
no.
Boston was very different in those days, and women's lib had not yet arrived on the scene. I actually was told by someone on Nantucket Island, young lady, you come down from that ladder up there. I was painting and doing house renovation, and they would not allow me to do that work. So the world was a different place, and you had to be a lot more creative. If you're a woman, especially, there were no women cops, no women truck drivers, no women, doing things that men were considered to do. So something like doing house renovation was very much a man's job. And I was attracted to doing things that were challenging. So that's how I got into it.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot to take in right there.
I know.
What's funny? I actually mentioned this on the last podcast when I was interviewing Sean. I threw out a random question to kind of an icebreaker question. And I had looked up, I was curious, when did it become acceptable for women to start wearing pants? It just kind of came to me the other day that I'm like, I wonder, I love pants so much. I wear pants almost every day. And I'm like, and in that article I found, it said like mid 20th century. But what you're suggesting is like actually later, that, I mean, even to go to school and not be able to wear slacks, like
The
in the
school
60s.
the school I went to, which was not like a high class school, we actually had to have a permission slip to wear slacks. And we either had to go bowling, our excuse was to go bowling,
No way.
or tennis or something. And it was like, yeah, every other time, if you wore slacks on campus, you were given demerits, and they were very strict. Now this was Boston. Now Boston was a little like more rigid than the rest of the nation. I'm sure in Berkeley and California they were wearing slacks earlier, but Boston, they had the blue laws, which was kind of left over from Puritan days. It's a very interesting town.
That is interesting. And what an interesting setting to find yourself in, and to, start really finding parts of you calling to you that you're drawn to putting your hands on. I'm going to recreate this, this dilapidated structure, and revise it,
Mhm.
create something new. And then to also welcome other people to be a part of that, that's just really, really cool.
It was gorgeous. It was up on a big cliff, because Roxbury is kind of the place where the old sea captains used to live. Hardly anybody remembers this anymore. But after I left from that place I was telling you about that I renovated, I went to another place that I didn't own, but I loved the building. It had a widow's peak up on the top. And in the previous century, all the sea captains' wives would live in these mansions in Roxbury, because they were up on a hill and they could look out on the widow's peaks to see the whalers' ships coming in. And so these beautiful estates that were in the ghetto of Roxbury had trees from all around the world, because the sailors would bring all these trees that you couldn't find anywhere else because of the adventurers. It was a very, very cool place to live.
That is so interesting. I love that.
Mhm.
It goes along with the whole intermingling of species and diversity, and just no wonder you liked it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's always
That's
been
really
my thing.
neat. Yeah. So were you involved in any other projects like that when you were in Boston, or was that it for that time?
Well, at the time when I was finishing up renovating these two houses, which took years, we're talking about like 3 years of really hard work. Then I learned how to sail in Gloucester Harbor, and I just fell in love with sailing. I had my first cruise. Somebody invited me to deliver a boat from the Pacific side of Costa Rica over to the other side of the Atlantic, and I just fell in love with cruising. So I left Boston in the early 70s and went to the West Indies. So that was the beginning of another phase of my life. During that time, I did no real estate. I was just a sailor, and I had an inter-island shipping business. So a whole different phase of life that doesn't have anything to do with real estate, but has a lot to do with creativity.
Oh, for sure. I've heard you talk about that a little bit on your podcast, and it's just super cool, very inspiring. And also, side note, yes, it is off the subject, but I'm very impressed about the sailing. Sean and I recently joined a boat club, and we've been going out on the boat, and we just go on the intracoastal, and we
Mhm.
approach we haven't gone to the ocean. We don't plan to go to the ocean at all, but I can
Oh,
see it in the distance. And how intimidating is that? Like, it's awe inspiring and also terrifying. So
I would say the ocean was my first spiritual teacher. I mean, it's that powerful. Yes, nature itself is a great teacher, but you're right. The ocean, you can't mess with the ocean. You have to really surrender to the ocean. And by sailing on it and really learning how deep water works as opposed to coastal water, and navigating and just staying alive, it really was a great teacher.
I can imagine. It would change you to it just makes you feel like, I don't know, a little bit like a lot vulnerable, I suppose.
Well, I think what it taught me, the very first lesson was it's really healthy to have a good fear of something, not a terrifying fear like, oh, gee, I'm going to die, but oh, if I don't learn this, I will die. So
Mhm.
it's motivating to learn about things, like just throwing out an anchor, for instance. If you don't know how to anchor a boat, you could be in a very serious problem, because you could run, your boat could just get loose, and all things could happen. And while you're sailing out at sea, if you're not totally aware of what's happening 360 degrees, you could be run down by all of a sudden a big ship appearing out of nowhere because you forgot to look around you. So many wonderful lessons.
That's really cool. I love it.
Mhm.
Well, back on land,
Oh yeah.
we're back. Yeah. So later in life, and I'm not, maybe you can position us in your timeline. When there was a time in your life, I believe, when you had your family and everything, you started traveling to a different city in Florida and renovating and flipping homes.
Right, but before that, I was thinking before we got together this morning, there's a segment of my life you don't know about, where I actually renovated a 10-acre farm. And that was in 1984. And so another partner and myself, we just love doing this. My friend was a sculptor, and I of course do multi different modalities. I do sculptures and paintings and films and whatnot. So we lived in New York City because we were doing the New York City starving artist thing, trying to get shows here and there and mingling with the art world, because it's like going to Mecca. If you're an artist, you really have to go to a big city, whatever big city. You can't really understand the art world, how it functions, unless you go to a major city of some sort. So I went to New York City after my 10 years in the Caribbean. So it was like 1982 or 1980 actually. And I purchased a 10-acre farm, very, very run down. Talk about dilapidated. Yeah. The beams were rotten. Not everything was just bad. So once again, with a partner, and we actually took on another couple too. We had 4 people invested in this beautiful place, very cheap. And they had little cabins on the land, which we also renovated. So we could rent those out during the summer. So in the course of another 3-year span, I renovated a farmhouse and the barn and 5 cabins. And when it was sold, I made quite a bit of money. That was a good investment. And then after that, the story begins about coming to Florida and doing really like fix and flip type things.
Where did you say the farm was located?
It was outside of New York City.
Outside of New York City. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so it was like a 2-hour drive. So it was like everybody in New York wants to get out of New York because it's so, New Yorky.
Yeah.
And so we, it was in Sullivan County, which is like a 2-hour drive outside of the city. And so we just decided, okay, we'll just invest in this very reasonably priced 10-acre farm. And I know a lot about big properties too, because my grandparents had a farm. So I knew about farming, and I knew about the orchard. We had an orchard. We had to prune the trees and, fix the barn and all that stuff.
It sounds really beautiful.
Yeah.
Did you, I just kind of crossed my mind. I'm just kind of curious, these days we advertise our rentals in VRBO or Airbnb.com. How'd you find tenants back then? Newspaper?
Well, before Craigslist, everything was paid ads. That's just the way you did it. But in this particular, with the little farm, it was close to a spiritual center, which I was involved in. So we filled it up with spiritual buddies. And when you're close to a community like that, everybody likes to be in like-minded circles. So we had no problems renting our little cabins out for the summer to like-minded spiritual people. I'm a yogi, as you know. Maybe the listeners don't. All my life I've done hatha yoga, which is the physical, and meditation and chanting. So we filled it up with yogis.
Oh, that's nice. I love that. And I have a feeling they would probably take care of the place and treat it as a sacred space.
Yeah, you'd like
Ideally.
to think so, but there's people are people.
Yeah.
Right, but at least when you get a certain tribe of people interested in being, it wasn't a commune because everybody had their own separate little place, but because we all love to do these sacred rituals like chanting and meditating and the postures, I think there was a little more intention. And they're called communities of intention these days.
Mm-hmm. That's nice. I guess commune could have negative associations or something. Is that why?
Yeah, this wasn't a commune. Everybody had their own little place.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a commune. I did do the commune thing before, and that's never appealed to me. Communes are, oh, they're just a little too anarchic or just random. And I was involved in a commune that had healthy eating as its base, so that was good. Everybody was vegetarian, and we all ate. But it's just not my thing to be in a commune situation.
Well, like it's easier to make juice for a bunch of people than make juice for one person. I can say that even in my own house. It's like you have to get out the juicer, make a big mess. You might as well make
Right.
juice for everybody.
Yeah. But interestingly enough, I'm talking about how to find tenants.
Yes.
When I finally got into the Sarasota part of my life, which was after marrying Carter, which was 30 years ago, for the first 10, 15 years, Craigslist was not existing. That was before cell phones, before really I was using email. I'd heard about email, but I didn't start using email until about 95. And Craigslist, I don't know when it was invented, but before Craigslist, it was really hard to find tenants because you had to pay money for an ad. And when Craigslist came along, all of a sudden, wow, it changed things.
I can imagine. Yeah. Change the
Mm-hmm.
whole landscape and how people think of finding other people.
Right.
Very interesting. Well, I know from reading your wonderful book, Zen Love, you do discuss some of that part of your life where you were traveling over to Sarasota
Mm-hmm.
and doing these beautiful renovations. I'd love to talk about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering how you developed your tastes and your ideas when it came to approaching a home that you would want to renovate.
Right. Well, I've always been a big believer that art is meant to be a part of human life. And so I always did the most outrageously beautiful, outstandingly weird places that I could, and people loved it. And by that, I mean everything from color to getting rid of lawns, because I just am a big believer of xeriscape. Right away, I just started getting rid of lawns. And we're talking about downtown Sarasota. So I'll just give you an example. Like one of the places, we always tried to find the most rundown place in the historic district. So it would have a high value, a high resale value. And of course, the first thing you think about being interested in real estate is what they call curb appeal. So you want to have it look great just from the street before you even get out of your car. You fall in love with the place. So how do you do that? With the colors of a place and the plantings. So I gave a lot of attention to curb appeal. And I had a wonderful mentor, one of my friends who was our realtor, but he also became a really close friend. He was very interested in art. He used to be a gallery owner before he became a realtor. And he taught me to be bold with color and with plantings, because that's what he did. And one should not be shy about being a fix and flip person, because you always want to shoot for the highest, not to just think, oh, I have to be conservative, I have to sell it to, just the first person who comes along. Believe me, art really is important to people. And a lot of people think to themselves, oh, I could never do this. I could never have thought of those colors. I would never have thought of this kind of a terraced front lawn instead of just grass. So I had a really great mentor, and the colors were all right up my alley, because I had just come from spending 10 years in the tropics, where people are so bold with color because it's all around you. And Sarasota, Florida, it's a perfect place to go tropical all the way. You can actually plant things like a mango tree and a banana and even a coconut, whereas here where we live in northern Florida, we can't, because of the temperate zone. It changes that much, just like 5 hours away. So the first thing I thought about was to create a stunning art piece. And then the second thing I thought about was function. Because like, for instance, I cannot stand it when you're sitting down and eating and you see a bathroom. because everybody always leaves the door open. And it's such a turnoff to be sitting there eating and you see a toilet. No, that's one of my pet peeves. So even if it means ripping out a wall, rearranging or replumbing, it's feng shui. It's feng shui. You want to think about the energy. You don't want to be thinking about sitting there looking at somebody brushing their teeth, while you're having your meal. Even in the smallest place, you can do that. And then light is really important, and ventilation is really important. So in some places, I would actually create more windows, put in different doors, get the air moving, put in fans if I could, if they didn't have them, and just create like a energy thing. I work with energy, and that's the feng shui part of it. Some people call it feng fui, but it really is an energy that you feel. And sometimes it can just be done with using mirrors or having a window over a sink instead of staring at a wall. And so the energy is important too.
That is really interesting. I love so much of what you said, especially, well, I love how you mentioned being in the tropics and living, and I think you said Costa Rica, and spending time there, and just how they brought in the colors from nature, because you said the color is all around you. So why wouldn't you make that part of your space and part of the, your curb appeal? And I think it's really neat that you brought that to Sarasota as well, because you saw that it would work there. And it's a different focus than a lot of, I think probably a lot of professional, I don't know, realtors or whatever. I mean, the common advice, if you like Google, how should I prepare my home for the market? It's like very, very bland, very plain, very safe. So it's an interesting contrast to hear, well, you know what? People like art too. Art is important too. People, there are people out there that really like color. So let's not make it all one, monotonous, I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's add some splashes of creativity.
Yeah, I can give an example too. In Boston, where I was renovating places up there, you can do it in the northern parts of the country too. Too many people use these heavy drapes where you can build shelves across windows and have plants growing. So your window can become this garden rather than having a drape. And people can't see through all these different leaves. I mean, if you're worried about somebody seeing you, if you have a lot of plants in the window, it's the same as having heavy drapes. So it's something that people need to get away from, to think that they have to block out the light so much. I mean, okay, some people can't sleep unless it's dark. And that might be something that's functional. They have to take care of the light, or they could wear blinders instead of making their house so dark.
Right. Really, really interesting. Was it, how was it trying to balance your concern for functionality with the artistic side? Does that come pretty naturally, or was it a struggle at all? Or?
No, I think it goes hand in hand, because like I said, if you just take that one example of a bathroom should never be close to where you eat, or at least so you can see into it. That's almost like a rule of thumb for me. It's just like a kitchen needs to be attractive, because I'm an awesome cook, and people who like to cook spend a lot of time in the kitchen. So a kitchen should be just as beautiful as a living room, maybe more so, because a lot of times the heart of a home is the kitchen. So I just think that the first priority is to make it energized creatively, because once you think that, then the function follows that. The function follows the form.
I love that. That's a really neat way of looking at it.
Sometimes you have to change like a front door, make it so it's a side entrance or a back entrance, because it's sometimes every place is different. You have to just see how the energy flows in a place. Just like we were talking about the water, you have to observe it. You have to spend a little bit of time in the place before you start designing.
Yeah, get in tune with the place, and then get in the inspiration from that. That's neat. Did you ever come across any resistance within yourself or externally by making some bolder artistic choices that made sense to you, but maybe to
Yeah,
me every day, like, I don't know, Joe Smith or something, maybe didn't make as much sense?
yeah. Well, like my mentor, at one point he said, "Oh, Taz, you've gone too far." But I said to him, "Bruce, you got to trust me on this. I know this is going to work out okay." And I was doing unusual colors, even for a tropical setting. And I was doing a lot of stonework in, like changing a driveway into a patio and putting down wonderful marble and granite, putting an awning up instead of making it a driveway. I just made it into an awesome patio. And when he saw the job, he said, "Ooh, I think we're going to have trouble." But he was wrong. We sold it immediately to a color therapist, to somebody who works with color to help people have better mental health. And there's sometimes you just have to follow your gut, especially if you've done a lot of training. I mean, like, okay, we all spend our time learning things. And because I went to art school, I had to start with, well, what are colors? You got to start with basics. You can't just start with mud. And you start with the color wheel and you see how this goes with that. And then the more you do, the more you learn intuitively. And then you get to a place where you trust your intuition and you can follow it.
That's really neat. I love that. I was just thinking about color theory this morning for
Uh-huh.
some reason, because I was thinking about I've taken just a few art lessons. And the first time I heard about color theory was about 2 years ago. She brought over the color wheel, the teacher, and she showed me that, well, this is where all of the colors turn to gray around this point. And then you can see the opposites. They complement each other. I think it was like red and
Mm-hmm.
green were like opposites. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, it just was so interesting. And I obviously I took music
Yeah.
theory, and I took like 4 semesters of music theory in my graduate program. And it was neat to see that there was a color theory, because I did not realize there was a color theory
Yeah.
before that. It's so interesting.
Well, yeah, especially when you deal with brown, like brown. When you think brown, it's like, oh, I used to hate brown. But now there's good browns and there's dull browns. And like you just said, red and green, if you look on the color wheel, they're opposites. And so if you take a red paint and a green paint and start mixing them together, in the middle, you get a beautiful brown. And if you take a blue and an orange, which are opposites, and you mix them together, you get another beautiful brown and yellow and purple. Those three are the major ones that go across the color wheel. They're called complements when they actually are going across each other. But they make brown, not gray, when they're combined. And gray is gray, you actually have to have black in to make gray. But you get
Yeah,
brown, different shades of brown when you mix all these different colors.
that's so neat. I love it.
Yeah,
Um, that's really interesting. It's like the opposites attract, and they make their own kind of beauty when you put them together.
right. And when you use like red and green next to each other, they go boing. And everybody Gators fan knows blue and orange, boing. It just makes it
Right.
makes this energy. And
Right.
that doesn't happen with colors that are aside each other. The ones that are opposite really have that charge.
It's that tension.
Yeah, and makes your eye go like kind of crazy. Your eyes react to it.
So I that's really neat that the right person came along, the color therapist, and then the home just
Yeah,
resonated with her. So even despite, the concern of your mentor, it
right.
sounds like it worked out really, really well. So that's really neat.
Yeah, and I would always go for what they call accents. I mean, there would be like in interior. I would always make sure that there was an accent, like one wall that had a special kind of treatment with fragmented stone, for instance. That was not just tile, but an interesting, almost like a mural in stone, or another wall that would be a different texture. So accents, it's something that you also do in a garden. You always have an accent paint, an accent plant. And inside you would have an accent, maybe it would be an a built-in cabinet or built-in sofa, a built-in bed or something. So to make people feel like, wow, this is really unique. And another thing I used a lot were skylights. I forget the name of them. There was a skylight that used a lot of mirrors. So if you had a dark area where there'd be 2 or 3 rooms that come together and it's just dark, you could insert, it's almost like a little tube, and it creates so much light because it's bringing the sunlight in using mirrors. Are you familiar with that, Anastasia?
No, I'm not.
Uh-huh. It's a very neat kind of skylight. It's almost like just a little tube, but it illuminates dark rooms.
That's really fascinating. I'm going to look that up after we end this show. I'm very curious about that. I love light.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, just curious because as I mentioned, I read your wonderful book, Zen Love, and in it you talk quite a bit about family and the challenges and joys and journey of being part of a family. So with your both the real estate projects that you would work on in Sarasota and also your other creative life and things like that, how do you find balance? That's a big question that we talk about in this show, is how do you find balance?
Yeah, balance is the name of the game, isn't it? No matter what, especially if you've got a lot to juggle. So for myself, when I really went into the fix and flip, which is the most time consuming and really concentrated type of real estate business that I've been involved in, because nowadays we just basically are laid back investors. It's easier. But when you do the hands-on and you're renovating and you've got a crew of carpenters and tilers and plumbers, not to mention being the landlord and helping everybody be happy, for me, I don't see how anybody could do it without a partner. And, so fortunately, my partner, my beloved Carter, who has been my husband for 30 years, we right from the beginning decided this was going to be the best way for us to negotiate a big life change, to go from just kind of scraping by to boosting our economics into the stratosphere. So our kids were old enough. I mean, I'm the stepmom also. My book is all about how you juggle not just life with kids, but also being in a blended family where you're not just this nuclear family. I did not give birth to these kids, but I raised them because I was the full-time mom. So right away, we decided that we would switch roles and he would take over the domestic duties because I had this project going on in a town that was hours away. So I basically would leave for many days and come back and leave and come back. So we had an arrangement where he was okay with doing the part that I had done before, which is, basically the domestic thing. And then he also had his job, but we had to hire not a nanny, but somebody who would help with the house cleaning and stuff. And he did the cooking, which was kind of funny, but everybody loved it. And so with partnership, anything's possible with a good partner. And so if somebody had a disagreeable partner, I would say it would be really hard. And like Carter today, even after 30 years of marriage, we just had what we call mastermind. We do masterminding, which is goal setting. And when we're working on a big project, like we're getting ready to take a big trip, we mastermind, which basically means that we intentionally set goals. We know we have to work for it. We have to make accommodations for things that are going to be important. We don't just let them happen accidentally. And so by masterminding, by goal setting in a very kind of beautiful way, it's almost like a ritual you do. Anybody can look it up. Masterminding has been, I think it was introduced by Unity Church about 20 or 25 years ago. That's when I started doing it. And Carter and I have done it all along. So it's a partnership thing. And sometimes you have to reverse roles because I'm better at renovating than Carter. And even though he may not cook as well as I do. It's okay. The kids liked the fact that he was trying. So we just played roles. We switched our roles around.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's great. I
Mhm.
can definitely relate to that. I'm blessed to have a supportive and open-minded partner as well. And he's actually a better cook than me, I have to say. And he doesn't mind. He actually enjoys cooking more than I do.
That's good.
So that helps. But it's so important. I mean, it just helps to have somebody that's adaptable, and you guys can work together, and you can
Mhm.
have a good communication between the two of you and
Yeah.
common goals. It's beautiful.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful dynamic. So I want to sort of bring us to the present day. We're currently in 2021. What a year. And at this time, you and Carter are still involved in real estate, are you not?
Yes, we basically have a partner, always a partner, and it's a family member, so it's very trustworthy, and it's a long project that started 20 years ago, and it's still ongoing. It's amazing. And it's basically middle income rentals in another town besides where we live, and also where our partner lives. It's a different town. So um, it's just worked out that way because this particular town where we have the rentals had the need, it had needed housing. So we have quite a few, and Carter's and my job, so to speak, is to do all the bookkeeping. And our partner does all the managing, but yet there's a hands-on manager who does things like, repairing a broken window and all that. So it's a coordinated effort. And then we also do investments as they appear on the horizon, because to invest in a property is a very good way to make your money work for you. I'm sure you know that. Anybody listening to this program probably knows that. Instead of, for instance, putting all your money into the stock market or trusting it to somebody else who may not know what they're doing, and other ways of dealing with money. Because once you make money, then you have to learn how to keep it, because that's just as important as making the money. So we've become very wisely discerning. Like, for instance, we used to have somebody doing our accounts, and we ran into an extortionist, and it was very costly, and it was years of ironing out. And so Carter and I sit down and we do our own books. We use QuickBooks, and it's a methodical thing, but the two of us do it together. Like he's putting it into the computer, and I'm sitting there like saying, this is how the way it gets divided. And that's because we don't trust an accountant, because once you get burnt, you don't want to get burnt again, and it's very expensive.
Oh, it sounds like a headache and a half.
Yeah.
So what do you guys have a certain schedule that you stick by to do that process? I mean, that sounds like a pretty heady process. What do you do? How do you
We
plan that
try
out?
to do it at least once a year. No, we've gotten really slack about it, but we've tried different ways. We've tried keeping up with it monthly and bi-monthly, and now we basically just are happy to do it once a year. And so we spend a whole week bringing all the accounts up, and we just, for that, it works for us.
Yeah.
So we
Knock
do
it
it once
out.
a year. Yeah, some people can do it monthly, but we've got so many other things going on because we're both very interested in other parts of life. And really, you only need to get those books together the way we do it, and then everything's on a CD when you do QuickBooks, and you shoot it off to the accountant. So what we're doing is bookkeeping. And so we basically spend one whole week a year bringing everything up.
Wow. Wow. That's very interesting. Yeah. That sounds like when tax time rolls around, it's like Sean and I
Yeah.
are like, oh my gosh, because we're not like month to month either. We kind of knock it out all at
No.
once, and it's a pain, but
Yeah. So
you got to do it.
we try to do it right around, like you said. It's good to have a deadline.
Right.
What would we do if we didn't have taxes, right? We would never do the books.
Right.
And then it would be but it's very interesting to do the books because we use all these different categories and we separate all the different properties. So we know exactly like how the rents have increased and what kind of repairs we have, because with QuickBooks, once you set it up, you just push a button and you can see this particular property has had a roof problem or a tree falling on it. And, you really can see the overall view once you set up your QuickBooks, proper way, which we paid for because it's very complex to set up QuickBooks.
Oh, so you had somebody assist you in the setup process?
I had an accountant set it up so that the accountant would get everything that they need to figure out all the variables. And so when we do the books, we have all these little slots and we make sure that we really do all those little slots. We fill them in. We're not just skipping corners there because it makes it so it's easier to deal with the yearly taxes.
Well, that's nice. It paints a kind of metaphorical picture of your year in numbers, I suppose. And it's important to be able to see how things are performing. And you learn from looking at that, I'm sure.
Not even a year, but like these properties we've had for 15 years. So you can really see, like for instance, now, ever since the pandemic began, when people really had a hard time paying their rents, but we've learned over the years, and this is very interesting, Anastasia, for anybody who has renters, but our partner who's in charge of vetting the renters decided to be pretty strict. Like for instance, no unmarried couples. They have to have a marriage. And why is that? Well, statistically, unmarried people break up more. And there's going to be the likelihood of an instability with the rent paying. So one of the things is that they have to be a married couple and they have to have a source of income and this and that and that and this and a deposit. And so because of all those requirements that we have in place, our renters have been terrific. I mean, like over the course of 15 years, we've had maybe 5 evictions, which is really astounding.
Oh yeah, that is really astounding. Wow. I guess another way of looking at the numbers, looking at the statistics, and that's a very interesting approach. It sounds like it's working.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was kind of hard-nosed when I first heard that our partner was doing that, but then I see the results over the years, and he just decided to do that because of having experimented with his own experiences. And it really does pay to vet your people closely before you let them be your tenant. It's easier to do that at the beginning rather than to have an eviction.
Right. Do the hard work up front so you don't have to do it later, or do some more hard work later. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, well, that's really neat. So I love that. I love hearing how your journey has evolved. And I know there's a whole lot more to it than obviously we touched on in the show because we were focusing on the real estate aspect. But right. But overall, what would you say has been the most rewarding thing about being involved in real estate, and or the most frustrating, if you want to address that as well?
Well, it definitely changed our economic situation. It took us into a different stratosphere when we did fix and flips. And it just is a wonderful way to invest time and energy and money and expertise and all that. You get a big payoff. And I think it's a better investment than just an unknown, like, you see somebody who has a company that you might be interested in investing in. And this way, when you invest in real estate, especially when you're fixing and flipping, you have more control over what the outcome is going to be. So it changed our lives. It brought us into an area of comfort that we did not have earlier in our married life, because that's when we were doing the fix and flip, Carter and myself. And before that, before I got married, I mean, it definitely was not just fun, but it was better than having a job. I mean, I would rather invest in a place and fix it up and flip it than go, be a secretary or, go back to school and be a scientist or something like that. We all have to make a living. And my focus, because I'm a creative person, has always been, what can I do so I can create without having to think about what to create. I'm not the type of person who's going to create a seashore landscape because I happen to live by the seashore. I want to create things from my imagination. I'm a visionary artist. So I would not want to create, like mountains if I lived in Colorado, because maybe I wanted to just do abstracts. So as a creative person, I don't want to be told how that creative energy is to be used. So the real estate provided freedom and to maximize, more bang for the buck. For the amount of time and energy and effort you put into it, you get a lot more rewards.
That's really well said. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I'd love to if you would let people know where they can find you and find, your work. So if you don't mind, go ahead and share how they can
Oh,
find
yeah.
you.
Well, good old TezaLord.com. And people may not know my name is spelled TezaLord.com. And everything is there, like my history, my books, my podcast, my weekly blog, everything is there. It's central headquarters. But I'm also on Amazon. I have 4 books, and 3 of them are nonfiction narratives. And you mentioned Zen Love, that now is an audio book. And I narrated it myself. Some people really like to listen to books, so it comes in Kindle and paperback and audio.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, I highly recommend Teza's her work and her art and her writing. What would you recommend would be the, first book they should read or listen to if they were going to read a book?
Well, Zen Love, I think, is a good one. We've talked about that. That's the one that I'm really, I think it relates to what's going on right now. It's about the blended family of humankind. And each one of us in our own personal lives, if you've even got just a friend or a cat, maybe you don't have children, maybe you're not married, but you're in a blended family. And so the blendedness is what's happening to the world right now. We are becoming mixed, and we are becoming comfortable with being mixed more and more. And the resistance about being mixed is dissolving. So that's what Zen Love is all about. But it uses my own personal experience with a lot of challenges, a lot of hardship, a lot of opportunities to grow beyond negatives, which a lot of people get admired with. They just think that they can't accept difficulties. But in a blended family of humankind, what's happening in this world, we must learn to accept. It's just like with COVID. We have to accept the fact that the pandemic has happened, and it's changed us, and the world has changed, and people who resist that are having a hard time.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, thank you so much again. It's been really wonderful. I loved hearing more about your experiences with real estate and your art, and how you fused the two together. That's really neat. So thank you so much again.
Oh, thanks for having me, Anastasia. It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Have a blessed day.
You too. All right. I'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.